Thank you for tuning in. In today's session, I'll take you through the main steps to navigate through the aged care system in 2025, including all the changes and, more importantly, what's staying the same as well. So some housekeeping first. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So during the webinar, you can type questions in the question box that'll be on the side here, and it may look different on the phone, but the question box will pop up somewhere on your phone, and you can ask questions throughout the session, and then at the end of the session, I'll go through a couple of the questions as well. If you miss a chance during the session to type up a question or you think about something later, don't worry too much about that. During the follow-up emails, you get a chance to ask some further questions as well. So without further much ado, let's go through how to access the aged care system in 2025. So welcome to the summarized guide of how to access aged care support. My name is Guy Burns and I look forward to taking you through today's presentation. If you're concerned about what you've heard about changes to My Aged Care in 2025, my aim for this session is to provide you with the straight down the line information we have to date about what's happening. So nothing from what I've heard from Facebook, only from the program manuals and from the consultations I've been involved in the last couple of months. I'll also share insights and stories from the last time I was involved in major changes back in 2016 that I believe will apply to the situation this time too. And hopefully by the end of the session, I'll leave you with some actionable strategies you can take now to prepare for the changes and manage the changes when they come in July. So here's what's on the menu today. It looks like a lot, but I've cut out the fluff and it's just the main points. The Australian aged care system is one of the best in the world and provides care for over 2 million people to improve the health and quality of life of older Australians, but it's also hard to get into and to navigate to get the best care. With the changes coming up this year, it could become even harder to get care sorted for yourself or for your loved ones. Now, this list looks like a lot, but don't stress, they're going to be short and punchy with just the important information. And I'm sending out a copy of the recording so you don't have to worry about missing something while you go. If you have questions, type them in the question box and we'll go through as many as we can at the end too. I've split up the big changes into a section about assessments, the way services are going to be delivered through the Support at Home program, and the changes to how people are expected to contribute to care. My name is Guy Burns. My mission is to help you get the care you need when you need it. In my experience working in aged care, I've met people and their families working long, countless hours trying to work out how the system works and how to access care. Even my colleagues who work in the system have found it hard to navigate for their own families. I myself have found it challenging in my own personal experience navigating the system for parents. Most times, unfortunately, they have to get care during a crisis and end up in the wrong care. I don't want that to be you, and I want to make the system work better for you too. I started Care Managers Australia to support professionals to navigate the complexities of the aged care system and to advocate for a better and easier system for all of us so nobody gets left out. I have 9 years experience working in the Australian aged care industry in roles including assessment, program development, advocacy and service delivery. I've built my knowledge through experience of a wide variety of roles working with the government departments, clients and professionals to provide you with knowledge and strategies to get the care you need. My aim is to arm you with the knowledge to find and access the support and care you need when you need it. The last bit of admin before we get started and then we can crack right on. But before we begin, I'm just going to dive into a disclaimer because I do this in my spare time and I can't afford to get sued. So please note, all the information in this section is about the Australian aged care sector and is not applicable to any other country. If you're dialing in from another country, your system will be different. All information provided in these sessions are for information purposes only and should not be viewed as legal, professional, or financial advice. While every effort has been made to provide the correct information based on the government's own policy documents and information, your individual experience may differ. And when making health or financial decisions, appropriate professional advice should be sought every time. I also do not represent My Aged Care or any government departments mentioned in these webinars. So welcome back. I'm starting with the headlines as these are the big changes that have either started already or are coming in 2025. Some of these changes will affect you either as a carer or a recipient of care, while some of these big changes are in the background to either your service provider or the government. I'll try my best to explain and focus on the big changes that only affect you and what is good to know but shouldn't impact you significantly in the background, just so you can kind of see the difference between the two. So we'll start off with the single assessment service. Came in December 2024. Before this, there was a non-clinical service called the Regional Assessment Service that assessed for entry-level services called the Commonwealth Home Support Services, and a clinical service called the Aged Care Assessment Team that assessed people for home care package services, residential respite and permanent care. Now, in each local area from 2025, there's going to be one organisation providing both types of these assessment services, and they're going to have non-clinical and clinical assessors. For example, if you live in North Brisbane, there's a company that's contracted by My-Aged Care to provide all of these assessments in that region, and there'll be another company in West Sydney, and so on and so on. If you're only starting to look for aged care services or you're new to the program, you probably won't see much difference. Maybe some of the new organizations will be a bit slow. First couple of months, they might just need a bit of time to set up. But as someone that's already been in the system, you may that maybe need some more home services or additional respite, you might see some differences compared to the assessments you've done before, but I will go into more detail in section 3 of today's webinar. So the next section is the home care program itself, which is changing from July 2025, and in my opinion, this is going to be a larger change for you and your parents needing care compared to the assessment changes. The new program will be called Support at Home, and we'll have a few key differences to the home care package program. The key changes are there's going to be 8 levels of funding instead of 4. There's going to be more limits to the types of services. For example, the home care package funding allowed you to fund everyday items like frozen meals, continence, aids, and even some sort of left field items like vacuum cleaners and Roombas, where the supported home program is going to have predefined services, and you can only sort of use those services to get funding for it. Another change is that after every 3 months, the funding is going to be only a little bit of it's going to be rolled over, so you can't really bank up funding. So in the old system, you could save up for bigger items, but with the support at home, there's going to be a separate program to apply for special living aids and home modifications. So I just want to point out again, none of this was my idea. I wasn't too happy with it in the consults, but obviously they didn't listen to me. But I will go through this in more detail in section 4, and hopefully I can give you a couple of strategies to help you sort of get back to the care you need as well. And then finally, the way you may need to pay for your services will also change. So previously there was an income tested fee for the whole program for home care packages, and you paid for it every day. So for example, if you were charged $1 per day, you would then pay $365 every year, regardless of how much you used your package. There were also some additional costs, such as having to pay up to a third of the cost of the meals. But with the support at home, the big changes are that, firstly, the types of services are going to have different co-payment rates. So you're going to pay, regardless of your income assessment, there's going to be no cost for financial services. There's going to be a 5% to a 50% cost for independent services, and then there's going to be between a 17 and a 80% cost for everyday services, and that will depend on how much your income assessment is going to be. So it's a little bit more complicated, but I will go through that in the next sections as well. Great. So before I go through all the changes, I want to point out a few things that are not changing. So in 2016, when I was first involved in the other big My-Aged Care changes, I saw a lot of people in the industry drop all the things that were working well, and only once we re-established all those good things did we get back on track. So for you as someone trying to get care, there's a few things that worked well in the old system that should work well in this system too. So I've picked 3 things that I think are valuable and to keep in mind that shouldn't change. So first, the way the system works, if I had to explain it in one sentence, is that you get assessed to get the services you need, and then if you need more services, you get assessed again for those, and then if you need more, as your needs changes, there's another assessment and another service. And for most people, this would happen over a couple of years or even a couple of decades. But the point is, you need to go through an assessment and make sure you get the services you need to get that one. But if you need more services at a later stage, you go through another assessment. So with the new system and the old system, that's not going to change. And there's only so many different things you can be assessed on in the aged care space. So the actual assessments themselves, while it may look slightly different, fundamentally they are going to be the same. So as long as you know how to express the needs that you have and be able to sort of explain them and, maybe have a good list, it doesn't matter if you're being assessed under the old system or the new system, you should most times get more or less the same outcome. Secondly, the assessments and supports are for daily needs. This is what we call activities of daily living. So what this means that the things we normally do every day ourselves and probably take for granted, where if someone needs them, they can get approved for a service for this. So while it's logical for us to focus on the big chronic conditions, you should make a list of the small things too, like tripping over a step every day, or not being able to hang up washing, or not being able to lift up a jug to make a cup of tea. So even in the old system and the new system, again, this is going to be the same. What happens a lot is we discuss the big things with an assessor, like maybe one of my clients has a serious illness, and then the assessor turns around and says, well, that's a Medicare issue. So it's just important to remember, with all the changes, focus on the stuff every day that you need, and you should get, you should get that outcome. And if you don't get it the first time, you're allowed to get a reassessment as long as you can show the needs have changed. The third point I've come up is that the services and the workers are still going to be there. I know it sounds a bit cringe, but there's thousands of people that have joined this low-paying industry because they want to help you. And they got a small pay rise last year, which is great. But even if you don't get the services you're expecting the first time around, they're probably going to work with you to make things work. It's also important at the start that there may be a few challenging weeks when you're trying to complete the assessment and income assessments, and it feels like you're going around in circles. But once these hurdles are overcome and you find a good provider, you'll be surprised the big difference a small thing like a weekly help with a cleaner or regular friendly face popping by every week will make this whole exercise worthwhile. And just want to reiterate, if you don't get everything the first time around, you can keep reapplying, and the workers will, and the organization, if you choose a good one, they will help you. Okay, so that's not going to change in the new system either. The way assessments are going to be run is going to be slightly different from previous years. There's a couple of minor difference and one major difference, which I'll go through to help you navigate the new system. There's a couple of minor changes, as I've said before, which with a little bit of preparation you should be able to navigate through. If you've had an assessment before, the new integrated assessment form will be slightly different but cover similar sections to the previous assessment type. The main sections are daily function, cognition, social needs, carer stress, and home safety. The questions are slightly more diagnosis driven than the last form, as they're asking for specific diagnoses. For example, the previous assessment would ask you about memory loss or confusion, where the new assessment asks for a specific dementia diagnosis. So the big takeaway is, if your parents have a diagnosis, have that list from your doctor or your GP, so you can start off and say, because there is sometimes a difference whether someone's got a diagnosis or not. But again, really sort of reiterate the daily issues that are caused by the diagnosis. So don't forget that you do have to do both things at once. Another difference is that you may have a non-clinical or clinical assessor. The non-clinical assessors can go through the entire assessment but cannot ask more in-depth questions or conduct any of the assessment tools. They're also still referring people to the entry-level Commonwealth Home Support Services until 2027, so for the next 2 years. To access the high levels of funding, you need to be assessed by a clinical assessor. It's confusing, but somehow we've been told this will work better than the old system. The biggest takeaway for you is to check with the assessment team when they call if you're having a clinical or non-clinical assessment. If you do start with a non-clinical assessor, though, it's not the end of the road for you, because during the assessment, if you can show that you need more care, they will escalate you to the clinical assessor. So it's not ideally you'd want to start with a clinical assessor if you need one. But if you've only been offered the non-clinical assessor, see that as your second chance to really sort of push forward what you need. Now's the big change that I've promised you. If you get this one wrong, it'll make your care a little bit harder to do until you sort of fix those issues down the track. So the biggest change to the old assessment is that under the old assessment system, you assess for entry-level service or a home care package level. And if you assess for a home care package level, you could chop and change the services as much as you wanted, as long as the cost of the service could be covered by the level of care. Under the new system, the assessor has to prove you for each, so they have to assess you for a level of funding, but also they have to assess you for each service. So there's a lot less flexibility once the assessment has finished. So if you leave today's session with one thing, is to make sure that the assessor has listed all the service types you might need for the next 12 months, even if you don't need them right now, or if someone's doing that, for example, yourself or a family member or a friend, if they're driving your parents around, you need to make sure that transport is listed as one of the service, and that'll cover whether that person's sick or they lose their car, maybe the partner's lost their driver's license. You need to be covered for that. Under the old system, we could just change a bit of the funding, change a bit of the services, but under the new one, you'd then have to get reassessed and have to prove it every single time. So the biggest change is not just having enough funding, but making sure that each and every single service is kind of been ticked off to say that you may need that in the next 12 months, or it's been covered informally by a family friend who can't guarantee 100% of time they can do it, because that's not realistic. The next section, I'll look at some changes to the services themselves and the funding, which I've mentioned briefly in the assessment section. This is where there's bigger changes. The assessment, there's a lot of background changes. But the actual services, this is where you as a carer or you as someone receiving service, you'll see a lot of differences, except for, as I've said before, having really good staff. They're still going to be there. Just the way it's organized is going to be very different. So stay tuned for the next couple of slides, and I'll take you through as much as I've found out so far. And hopefully that'll help you get prepared for the next year. What's happening here is there's going to be some grandfathering in place. So this is a term that comes up a lot in aged care. I'm aware of the no pun intended there, but it actually has a legal provision. So what grandfathering means is if you're on an entry-level Commonwealth Home Support Program service at the moment and you don't need any changes, even after the July changes, you'll stay on these services until you need more services. So for a lot of people, if nothing changes, they've got maybe a cleaner comes once a fortnight, maybe they get taxi vouchers under the Commonwealth Home Support Service and they're happy with that, no changes. They don't need to change anything. It's only when you need more help that you'll need to be reassessed, and then you might be placed in the new supported home program, and then you'll see, which I'll show in the next slide, so hopefully you'll stick around, is all the changes that are coming. But just the big takeaway for Commonwealth Home Support Services at this stage, it's still going to be there. There's over 1 million people getting really good service under this program, so hopefully they said it'll stay till about 2027, so they've been trying to get rid of it since 2016, still around, well, even before that, but still around. And it's a really good program. If you're assessed for these services, you'll be amazed how good they are in keeping you or your parents in their home nice, safe and happy, and being able to still do all the good things. So yay, Commonwealth Support Services. So they're still there. The supported home program will replace the home care package program, and I've heard conflicting reports about whether existing home care package participants will stay on their current program, the home care package program, or if they're going to get moved across to the new supported home program in July. So there are 1 or 2 more consults occurring before then, and I'll make sure I get an answer and then make sure that everyone finds out about that, because that's very important. The consistent answer so far I've heard is that no person is going to be worse off, both in how much funding they receive and how much they pay. So this is from September 2024. So if you were on, say, level 2 package, you had so much funding, you wouldn't then, even if you did move over to the supported home program, you would get at least that much funding, and you wouldn't be paying more until things change. The So with the supported home funding, so like I've said in the assessment section, there's going to be 8 levels of funding ranging from $11,000 per year for the level 1 program up to $78,000 a year for the level 8 program, and then levels 2 to 7 are going to be sort of iterative changes, increases in funding up until that top level 8. The other difference to the home care package is you can only use services from the service list that you provided from the assessment as well. So very important. I know I've mentioned it too many times, but you do have to make sure that you list all the services you need with the assessor and all the daily living tasks that you need, your parents need help with during the assessment. Now, the way the supported home service is going to work, the way that you actually use the services or purchase services, is that if you're given that $11,000, $20,000 or so on budget for the year, you then have to set up a quarterly, every 3-month budget, either with your care manager, or if you self-manage, you can do it yourself. And then the cost for each service will then be sort of charged against your budget. So you have to make sure that you don't overcharge every 3 months. Otherwise, you either won't be able to get more services until the end of that quarter. Some organizations will make you pay the difference, so you need to double check with your provider what's going to happen if you go over the quarterly budget, so to speak. But kind of how that works in the real world, right? So if you've got a service that costs $100 an hour, and you're on a level 1, where you get, say, $211 a week. Yes, I've looked it up. In this situation, you can get that service twice a week or 4 times a fortnight, and still be under the cost. Will be, two services are $200 for that week. That's less than your budget, and then that $200 will then be, the provider will charge your budget. They'll get paid by the government, and then your budget will have a couple of dollars left. And the other difference with the home care package is, if you don't use, so every 3 months is your budget. If you don't use all the funding, under home care package, you could just carry over everything every year. Slight difference this time with the supported home program is that you can use you don't have to use all the funding, but you can only carry over up to 10% or $1,000, whichever's less, each 3 months. So it's a lot harder to build up additional funds than under the home care package program. So if you need more services, you can't kind of save up for a rainy day. You need to get that reassessment. If you feel things are getting harder and harder, you need to really sort of get that reassessment as quickly as you can. Another thing which isn't, so care management, my last point, it's not super different, but the focus is different, is that the government's really pushing this self-management aspect compared to, say, the home care package program, because there was a lot of issues with providers overcharging for home care packages, or, to be honest, using it as a profit margin, not providing the service. So the sort of the default is that the assessor is assuming you're going to self-manage your service, and if you need care management help, you need to make sure that's one of those services list, and it can only be 10% of your package can be used up by care management. But kind of like what I said there quickly, is if you don't have it as one of your services, you can't get care management help. So this is very important if your mum or dad is very complex care, or you working full time and you can't do all of this chasing around and all the home visits and so on. You need to make sure that care management is one of those services that the assessor ticks off for you. So look, types of service, sorry, not types of, things that fall under care management. That'll be things like planning your care, the types of services, coordinating the services, working out the budget, and also helping with that review and reassessment, making all those case notes and all of that. If you need help with that, make sure that the assessor has put care management as one of the services. You don't have to use it, but if you don't have it as one of the assessment services, one of the assessed services, you can't then get help from the provider, because they won't be funded for it, unless you pay for it yourself, but it's really expensive if you're paying it yourself. So fourth time but final time, if you need care management services, make sure it's part of the list of services, and if you don't need it, you don't use it. You can manage your own package. A lot of people do it pretty well themselves, and then you can then use more of your package on actual services rather than having it coordinated. Another big difference between the home care package and the support on home program is that under the home care package program, any larger items, any ongoing everyday, or not everyday, but ongoing items would have been covered under that one budget. Under the new support on home program, there's going to be a separate funding bucket you can apply for large items and home modifications. So things like stair rails, trip hazards, small fixing to the floor if there's a trip hazard. That's now going to have its own program. So there's going to be advantages and disadvantages to this. So under the old program, you had to save up purchases for the bigger items. Under the new program, if you're applied for either the low, medium or high tier, you can access that funding straight away. So in some situations, that'll be quite good, because I did have customers that were waiting for like a very urgent stair rail or a change to their stairs, and they had to wait like 3 or 6 months to save up enough funding. Which is a bit risky, but that's all we had to do. But now under the new program, if, for example, the cost would have been $2,000, they could then have it done pretty much straight away. So the three tiers, there's the tier 1 is going to be a maximum of $500 funding, the medium tier is going to be $2,000, and then the high tier has a $15,000, but it's a lifetime limit, which may work out less than under the old program. But again, the difference is you can use it straight away and then get the benefits of those home modifications, which will hopefully mean that you need less care over the course of the time that you're using the program. So next section, we're going to be looking at the income assessments and out-of-pocket costs that are changing from July. So the government's made it very obvious that they want everyone to pay more for their care. And I'll warn you early that this section has very little good news, unfortunately. The best I can offer is that the better prepared you are, the more you'll be able to manage these changes before they come up. Another thing to remember for home services is there's a lifetime contribution cap of $130,000 over your lifetime, which works out to about $13,000 as the maximum contribution for each year over those 10 years. The residential contributions are not part of this ruling and are completely separate. But just something to remember, if you start restructuring your income, be aware that you don't want to be restructuring more than that amount, because then you'll make yourself worse off. So the only good news is there is a maximum, and you can hopefully work towards that. So for the CHSP services, the income assessment or the co-contribution is going to be the same. So for most places, they charge $10 or $15 per service, and that should be the same because the rules of the chain are going to be the same. So for some people, cost-wise, it might be better to stay on this CHSP program rather than go into the new support at home program. And we had this happen sometimes too with home care packages, where people stayed on the CHSP program because they had income that made those costs too high. So that's just something to think of when I go through the details, is that you need to sort of work out what's better for you. So the program's made for a certain, a certain way, and then it might suit you, it might not suit you, unfortunately, and you just need to work it out, either with help like with a navigator or with a financial planner or with your family, work out what's going to be the best program for you. Okay, I'll go through some of the details of the income assessment, and hopefully then you can work out how it's going to impact you individually. Under the old program for home care packages, you were given an income tested fee, and the result would be the same regardless of the type of services you used. So for example, if you were given an income tested fee of $10 a day, you'd then be paying $70 a week, regardless of if you had one service or 10 services that week. Under support at home, the big change is you're only paying for the contribution for each service, and some service types will cost more than others. So the services are going to be split into 3 categories. There's going to be clinical services, independent services, and everyday services. And each specific service will fall under one of these 3 categories. So clinical services such as nursing and wound care will not have a co-contribution charge, regardless of your income fee. So stuff like nursing, like I said, wound care, some of the allied health services, your provider will be funded for this service, and then you don't have to pay that mandatory fee. The other two are where there will be a fee. So the independent services, such as personal care and showering assistance, will have a fee ranging from 5% to 50% of the total cost of the service. And then everyday services such as cleaning and gardening will have a co-contribution ranging from 17% to 80% of the total cost. So there'll be a sliding scale, and when you do your income assessment, you will then be told the cost for, 0%, no charge for clinical services, but you'll be told your percentage for independence and everyday. So you might, for example, be told you have to pay 10% of the independent services and say 22% for the everyday services, and then hopefully your provider does it for you. They'll then work out the cost of the service, what's going to be your contribution, and what's going to be the government's contribution. And then, so the big takeaway there, the way to be prepared is to do your income assessment before you start and before you sign on that dotted line, so because this did happen sometimes with the home care packages. Some people worked out it's just too expensive, and then if they already signed, they get stung with these costs, and then we at the provider. So we work very hard to make sure that people that may have done a contribution got their income assessment before they signed with us. And I'll definitely tell you, do your income assessment before you start, so A, how much it's going to cost, but B, whether you need to look at something else like a private, working privately, which for some people unfortunately might be the best way to go. And also, care management services are not going to have a co-contribution fee either. So if you're using a care manager, that cost won't go to you either. We'll go through a couple of the terms. So these are where I've noticed some people perhaps not filling in the income assessment correctly may get overcharged, and then we in my previous experience with a couple of clients, we'd spend weeks or even months fighting with Services Australia to get it properly done. So just a couple of terms I want to make sure you're aware of, and how they work with the income assessment, because this is another whole pile of jargon on top of the aged care jargon. So under the old system, the income assessment was run through Services Australia and Centrelink, and as far as I'm aware, they're going to conduct the new assessment process too. As there's 3 assessment services though, the assessment outcomes will look different. So instead of getting one result at the bottom saying you're paying $10 a day, you'll get three outcomes. You'll get the 0% for clinical services, you'll get a percentage for the independent services, and you get a percentage for the everyday services. The key information you need to submit for the assessment though will be the same. And while there's some similarities to the pension test, which most of you have probably done for the full or part pension, there are a couple of minor differences for aged care. And for you, it's important you understand what information you need for each section. And I'll go through the ones where I've had clients get caught out in the past. And one of the downsides is where you make a mistake, nobody tells you, and your assessment sits there until you realize there's a mistake, or you keep paying that high mistake until it's fixed. And sometimes there's no refund. You might be paying that high rate for like 6 months or 12 months, and then you realize the mistake and you get it fixed, but you don't always. Sometimes you get the refund, sometimes you don't. I haven't found the rhyme or reason yet. So very important is when you do that income assessment, make sure it's correct. If you can afford an accountant or financial advisor, or you're using one, money well spent, to make sure it's done properly so you don't get overcharged. So firstly, a couple of terms. I'll go through a couple of the terms. So firstly, home services are different to residential services. The biggest difference is that your personal home is not included as an asset in home services. And I know there's exemptions in residential services, but that's a different webinar. But for your home, either you're doing the home care package or you're doing the supported home, the value of your personal home shouldn't be included. Otherwise, your assets are going to be like way too high, and then you'll be overcharged. But your personal home has to be where you're living and not renting out for an income. So if you have a boarder and you're renting your home, you're going to have to work out a percentage with your accountant. And also couples don't have to worry about splitting the value of the home. So on the form, it's both zero for you. So it doesn't matter whose name the home is in. If it's your personal home, you're not renting it, you're not getting an income, you're living in it, it doesn't count as an asset for home care services. Okay. Another term that crops up is they ask you for your ordinary income. It's a specific term for this assessment and for a pension. So this is the amount of income you've made in the last financial year, excluding any government pension contributions. And there are a few differences, but which I'll go through. So the ordinary income could be your 5-year returns or any side jobs you're doing, any money coming out of your super or any other income like that. Basically the two exceptions I've seen so far in previous with previous clients is if you get a DVA pension, that counts as an income, so you just need to be aware of that. Hopefully that should change with support at home, but with home care packages, a lot of DVA clients were getting massive income fees because that was seen as a pension. That was seen as extra income, which is a bit not great. The other thing is if you have an overseas pension, even if it's less than the Australian pension, even if there's a reciprocal agreement. So for example, a UK pension or a New Zealand pension counts as income. So just be aware of that. And any other country income counts as income. But even there, where normally you would not, with the pension test, for example, if you had a New Zealand income or a DVA income, it wouldn't count as extra income. In the aged care, it does. So you just need to be aware of that. The other one is assets. So any items that generate an income or could generate an income. So when you go through this form, they'll go through all the different types of assets. So just remember when you fill in all of this in, don't include your personal home. Everything else you can include. And if you're not sure, you can include it. And if it's not, stuff like cars and caravans are a tricky one, because they count in your pension, but they don't always count in your home care. But the important thing is if it's generating income, you do need to include it. If you've already done the pension test, then sometimes you don't have to redo this. This is usually just if you're self-funded retiree, you have to do the whole thing again. But just remember that don't include your personal home. I know I've said it 10 times, but that's the biggest, that's cost. Well, usually I've stopped it, but that's where a lot of my clients almost got massive income fees, and I've had to go back and change it and say, hey, redo it. You've added the value of your home, and then they've been given this horrible income assessment, and we've had to change it. And that just, it delayed care for a couple of weeks because we weren't going to start. But yeah, that's the biggest takeaway. Another one is the 5-year gifting rule. So just to be aware of this, if you've given any money, significant money, not like $5, but like significant money or significant assets to family members within the last 5 years, you have to declare these. So you can't just offload a bunch of assets the day before the assessment. You can do genuine gifts, but you have to declare that you've given those. So you have to include anything from the past 5 years. So just be aware of that as well. So just a few things just to be aware of. And I know I've mentioned these before, but I'll just repeat them again because if this does apply to you, very important. So this is a couple of issues that have cropped up with previous clients. So the first one, this sounds a bit unfair and counterintuitive, but if you receive a DVA pension, this is seen as an income, even if it's same or less than the government pension. We've helped a lot of DVA clients get off the old packages and find services from CHSP because they were being charged ridiculous amounts for very little funding. So there used to be exemption if you actually had active service. So if you served in one of the previous wars, there used to be an exemption for this, but they dropped this about 2 years ago very quietly, and we had a lot of clients that were not paying an income tested fee suddenly, and they'd served in one of the wars, and then they suddenly were then being charged like $10, $20, $30 a day. So at this stage, I don't have confirmation if the DVA funding is going to be the same in the supported home. But if this applies to you, so if you're getting DVA funding, I'd recommend you speak to DVA itself or like your local RSL, service league or so on, and see if they can help you with this, just to get that specific, see if they've got specific information. Because at the moment, that's something that's not been included in all the consults and updates. So if that applies to you, at this stage, I don't have an answer, but I can just say in the old system, you didn't get a good deal. So you need to just check if that is going to be the same or whether they've changed that. The next one is overseas pension. So these are seen as an income. As I said before, even if it's reciprocal. So I've had clients from the UK or New Zealand, they got stung with an income tested fee, and sometimes even they earned less than an Australian pension. They were then being charged at $10 or $20 a day, which is, so we had to make sure they didn't start the package, and we looked at alternatives because for some people it was too expensive. So I'd recommend you check with Centrelink if this applies to you before you start. And remember to the no worse off principle. So if you're on the home care package now and you have an overseas pension, and let's say you're being charged either nothing or $5 or whatever, if that was what you had been charged before September 2024, keep track of that, because the no worse off principle applies to you too. So you don't want to suddenly be charged like 20, 30, 40%, and then you've got to say no worse off principle. You got to write to your MP or so on, make sure you don't get charged more. That's probably the best advice I can give you in that situation. The last one is trust funds. So trust funds and family funds I found a bit tricky at the initial assessment. So the way this, because the way you've set up your trust fund may not suit, so the way you've set it up doesn't always suit what the person reading the income assessment, those backroom people at Centrelink, it may not suit what they understand, so they don't always know how trust funds work. And I've supported clients that have a trust fund, and it's sometimes very tricky to sort of explain to the Centrelink like the income and how it's split between family members and so on. So if you do have one, I'd recommend you work with your accountant and have that income assessment done before you start your services, because again, if you get a result, your result could be anywhere from like your 5% to 50%, and you need to know that before you start services, because if you start, you then get charged and then the provider has to chase you up, and if it's too much, if it's too expensive, you're better off knowing before the time and then looking at alternatives. So again, that's just something to be aware of. I know my solution the whole time is to apply before you start services, but look, that's the best advice I could give you for any of the situations I've given you with the income assessment. So, and also the biggest concern, so the first one is if you wait until you start services and then you get the income result and it's too high. But the other issue is if your income assessment's not completed correctly, and you might get charged a higher rate. And the rate will only come down once you've corrected things. So again, that's why I say do the assessment before the time. Take your time. If you can, if you've got an accountant, use your accountant. Even if you've got to pay for an extra session, like an extra $150, $200 for like a consult, it's going to be worth it to make sure that you get it correctly and you don't get overcharged. So look, I've gone through a couple of the changes, and I've tried to keep it brief and summarized, but even so, I know it can come across as overwhelming. There's a lot of changes, a lot of jargon, but hopefully with that right information up front, you can mitigate most of the issues and get back to those day-to-day needs and the good services and the good people trying to help you out. So for some of you, there might be no changes. Some of you might have quite massive changes. Some of you trying to get into the system might find it quite difficult. But all I can say is once you've gone through the assessments and so on, and you're into those, you're getting those services, most of you are going to have really good experiences. So, just kind of have to hang in there. What I'm going to do is I do want to go through, because I was around in the last change when MyAgeCare came in 2016. There were a couple of major changes, and while it's not exactly the same, there's most likely a couple of the lessons we can use in the current reform that happened last time. basically learn from the past kind of thing. So look, firstly, CHSP was called HACC back then. I won't go through the acronyms. Basically, it was an entry-level service. You had either a cleaning or a gardening service once a fortnight, but the government was adamant they were going to get rid of this service because it was old-fashioned, and they were like, it's disabling and all of that. But now 10 years later, CHSP services, they're still around. There's over 1 million people using them, and look, for a lot of people this is a very viable program. Okay, so if all you need is help cleaning the house once a fortnight, or better gardening help, there's thousands of people that use this service, and they're happy enough, and some of these people use this service for years and years and never go into the packages or the supported home. Okay, so lucky them. But if your parents only need house cleaning, or that's all they're going to accept, you might want to think about just getting into this program. It's super easy to use. The fees are not excessive, $10 or $15 a service. And look, the only problem is getting like a space on the service, because there's limited places, but the government is finally putting more funding into the program. So what that means is there's going to be more places for the providers, because if the providers only got enough funding for 100 people, now they should hopefully get space for like 110, 120, 130. So once you get a service on this program, you'll be surprised. A lot of people, it might be like the income assessment's too high for the other service, or their parents are refusing all the hoopla and complication. You'll be surprised if this service will work for you. It's a good service, and like I said, a lot of people, this is the only service they ever use. So CHSP is still around at least for the next 2 years, and hopefully it'll continue because it's a good program. Another change in 2016 was the new assessment services, including the one I was running, took a few months to kind of find their feet, right? And they were a little bit slow at the start, and to be honest, a couple of assessments were getting lost in the process. So what you can do is make sure your assessment's not lost by politely following up after you lodge your MyHK application. So if you did the screening phase, or you get that phone call to double check everything, you are allowed to ask them for the time frame. So if they say it's a high priority or a medium priority, you could say, look, what's the time frame? And then they might say it's 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 2 days or so on, but at least then what the time frame is. And then make a note, and if you don't get a follow-up call, let's say it's a 2-week time frame they're going to see you. If they don't see you in the 2 weeks, just politely follow up again. Okay, as long as you're polite, hopefully reasonable people won't be offended, right? But you don't want to make sure that because they're all going through these new processes, it's very easy for someone's referral to get lost. So you want to know, okay, it's going to be in 2 weeks, and then if nothing's happened in 2 weeks, just politely follow up. Also make sure that you provide all the assessment information at each stage. So when you do the online application, when you get that phone call, and when you do the face-to-face assessment, make a note of the key needs your parents need, and you need to repeat them at every stage. I know it's annoying, but you can't sort of guarantee that the person that you talk to might sort of not have all the information in front of them that you've mentioned last time. So you do have to repeat yourself. And also you want to leave the assessment kind of helping the assessor as much as possible, because they're working on a new system. It's very complicated. It's complicated for us. It's complicated for this too, because there's all this discharge summaries and GP medical histories they have to go and find, right? And they don't have that network that the last assessment system has. So if you've got those copies, give them to them, like email or face, on paper or so on. But you can sort of help them sort of skip those steps if you already got that information for them. So discharge summaries of the hospital, they should upload it they're supposed to upload it to your eHealth, but you can ask for a copy and keep that and take that to the assessment, give that to the assessor, and it just speeds things up, because they don't have to chase it up, and then just makes your assessment go quicker. So on the slide where I've said sort of clean your house, so what I mean is if you need care now before July, don't wait until July to go and get more care. So sort of back to my previous point there about 6 months before I started in 2016, things were not going well with the assessment service. And the new, like the new services were, like that, because they were like going, their processes weren't in place. If you wait till then to try and get more care, it's going to be a lot harder than if you do it now while there's still the old system in place. Then it's a lot easier to then sort of work with the services you've got now rather than try to change everything in July when the whole system's changing. That is the worst time to get care. Okay, that first month of July, and then hopefully as things will get easier in the next couple of months. But if you don't have enough care now, make sure that you get reassessed now, and make sure that you get those services in place as quickly as you can before July, as much as you can. Obviously you can't help if something happens in July, but at least now. If now the care plan's not working, speak to your care manager, get it sorted out now. Don't wait until July. And then also I've mentioned before, is to get your income assessment done before you start care. So if you're starting care now, just realize income assessments, they can take up to 6 weeks. So don't wait until you get approved for care, because at one stage it was taking 3 months. So you are allowed. Some people say you have to wait till you get that approval letter, that you can start care. That's not true. You can do income assessment once you've had your assessment, and they've come back and said so let's say you're under the old system, the home care package system, they say you've got let's say level 2, level 3 funding. You can apply for your income assessment there. The difference is that assessment's valid for 3 months. So it just means you need to redo it, and it costs nothing. It's time, but you don't actually pay to do the assessment. But if you wait until you're starting assessment, you then have to wait until you get that income assessment back before you can actually start care. So that'll delay actually getting care. So if that makes sense, apply for the income assessment through Centrelink as soon as you can. And ideally you want to do it so that you get the income assessment result before you start care, so you know how much you're charging. It also gives you a chance, if you realize it's going to cost too much, to work out an alternative. So then you can look at getting reassessed again instead for the CHSP program, or you might have to do like a private cleaner or something like that, because for some people that's going to be a better option. The last thing I want to also point out is, where I say advocacy and support, is that there are organizations that can help you. So there's a variety of advocacy organizations that can help. And a lot of them are funded by the government, so there's not always a charge involved. So that's something to check as well. So for example, ADA Australia, Aged and Disability Advocacy Australia, they can help you with specific issues, complaints. There's a complaints commission. There's Carers Australia that can help you if there's a carer. There's your local MP, federal MP, if there's an obstacle and it's very specific. So always, if you get stuck, look for people to help you. A lot of aged care is about the networks. For us as people providing the services, it's all about us making networks, but also you using the networks around you as much as you can. Using your care manager, getting you can get advice from friends and family if they've been in the same situation. It doesn't always apply. The only thing is that their situation might be slightly different than so sometimes their advice is correct for their situation but not always for you, which is a bit tricky. Or you can use some of the advocacy organizations, or the navigation organizations or so on to help you sort of get through those hurdles. Because like I said before, and I've said a couple of times, once you get through this process and you get the services, if they more or less you might not get all the services you need, but if it helps you out, you'll be surprised how much it's going to help your parents and how much it's going to help you guys as well. So it's definitely worth it for most people to go through all of this. Sorry, it's not all good news, but if you go through all of this, you then get those services. After a couple of weeks, you get into that routine. You'll be amazed how good these services are for most people, to keep them safe, keep them healthy, keep them out of residential care, and so on. So good luck with everything. And as I've said before, as I get more information out of the console, consultations and the department releases more information, I'll do some follow-up videos, maybe another webinar. I'll see how we go. But thanks for that. So we'll just finish off with a couple of questions. So I'll check out the questions as well. Alrighty. I've pulled up a couple of questions that are in the Q&A box, and I'll try to get through as many as possible. If we run out of time, I'll message any unanswered questions either by email. I'll work it out, either chat, email, or post, or so on, depending on the question. So let's have a look at the question. So the question is, can I use taxi vouchers? So I think they mean for the some supported home program, the new program. Just very quickly, under Commonwealth Home Support Program, there is an option for taxi vouchers called indirect transport. That's going to stay the same. So with the supported home program, the short answer is yes, you can still get taxi vouchers. The long answer is as long as you have transport listed as one of those services during your assessment, you can use some of your funding for taxi vouchers. And this is very important because under the old program, I had a couple of clients that they maybe had like a level 1 or 2 package, and they used everything legitimately for taxi vouchers to go to like doctor's appointments, to go to like pick up stuff from the shops. That was their care plan. They used all of it. That was fine. Now under the supported home program, you can technically still do that, but if you don't have transport listed, you can't. So that's something that's very important. So very important takeaway: if you or one of your parents is driving the other person, to all of those medical appointments, make sure the assessor knows that, because you can't guarantee you can take them 100% of the time. And then it's good to have those taxi vouchers just as a backup, or that transport or so on, so that you don't miss medical appointments. Because I found like when people start missing medical appointments for something as silly as not being able to get there, their health tends to plummet pretty quickly. So very important. Make sure, I know long answer to a very straightforward question, but you have to have transport listed. Otherwise you can't get taxi vouchers in the new program. So next question is, how often can I use the services? So again, just quickly shout out to CHSP services. They're going to be same as before. So the annoying thing is, for the CHSP services, some organization, there's no like hard and fast rule here. So some services, they you're only allowed one service a fortnight or once a week, and then you go to the other organization and it's different. But that should be the same. Supported home is going to be slightly different. There's no cap on a service, so you could use your whole budget on, like I said, taxi vouchers, cleaning services, physiotherapy, or etc. So you're not limited to, as long as you've got that list of, as long as it's one of your listed services, there's no cap that you can use all your budget on there. There was talk of capping gardening and cleaning during the design, because they wanted to take away someone's cleaning service, or they were like, you can only have it once a month or so on. But they did so that did come out for a couple of months. That was their view for a couple of months, but that's changed. That they backtracked because they got lots of complaints from providers and people in the community and so on. So a very important lesson is that even though it sounds like things don't change, if enough people lodge valid issues with their MPs and advocacy and their providers, they do make changes to the program. So don't give up if something's not going to look good. There is way. There will be more changes and there will be feedback. But yeah, so some people have heard that, like, they're capping services, you can only have one gardening service or something. They've changed that has been changed. So that was not a great way to design a program. But anyway, fortunately, a small version of sanity's prevailed there. Hopefully there's a bit more coming too. But back to the question is, how often can you use the services? The short answer is how much your package can fund. So if you funded for, say, $200 a week, and the service costs that you want costs $100, an hour, you can have that service twice a week or 4 times a fortnight, and then you can't have more because that'll blow your budget. You can have less, but that kind of limits how much funding you can have. So if you need more of that service, you need to then apply for a higher level to get more of that service. So the next question, if I'm contributing each week to the service, can I have more services? So I think what they mean is, like, if they paying, like if the funding's $200 and they're paying $50, do they get $250 of funding? I think that's kind of what that means. Unfortunately, the answer is no. So if your funding is, say, $200 a week and you paying a contribution, you paying a fraction of that and the government's paying a fraction, right? And it's down to the service. So let's say you've got like a 90-minute cleaning service and it costs $100. You're contributing 25% and the government's contributing and let's say you're contributing 25%. You're contributing $25 and Miage Care is going to pay the provider $75. If your neighbour's got the same service and their contribution's 50%, they're going to pay $50 and Miage Care is going to pay $50. So you won't get more services. You're just paying more or less if you're contributing to those services. Next question is, what happens if I don't have a service for that week, or I go away, like if you go on leave or something? So that's a good question. And that was a bit of a headache sometimes with home care packages if the provider didn't explain that very well. But look, the short answer for either home care package, Commonwealth Home Support, or supported home is, if you don't have the service and there's and you don't get stung with a cancellation fee, you're not going to pay. So look, this was a little bit different to home care package where you paid income tested fee every day regardless of what you did. If you don't have a service that week, you're not paying anything. And if you had a service but you cancelled it, like within cancellation rules, you wouldn't pay either. So I do want to sneak in a quick question about cancellation. Just like if you go to a doctor or a physio, right? This is something that is very important that your provider explains to you, because it's kind of, I've noticed before, it's sometimes assumed, but it's very important, right? So like if you go to a doctor or a physio, let's say you've booked an appointment and you don't go, a lot of them will charge you like a cancellation fee, and that's the same for aged care services. If let's say you had a service booked today, and you decide not to do it, the provider's still carrying a cost for that, like staffing or so on. So they may charge you like a cancellation fee, and then you would still pay your contribution of that. So very important is to check, and this is regardless of what your contribution is, right? Check what the cancellation policy is. If it's like 24 hours notice or whatever, make sure you sort of follow that, because if you cancel a service, let's say it's 24 hours notice and you cancel the service more than 24 hours in advance, you won't get paid and your package won't get stung for that amount, because then it's up to the provider to reallocate their support worker or their nurse or so on to someone else, because you've given them enough notice, right? And check if there's exemptions. Like if you're in hospital, that's no one's fault. Some organizations don't charge if you're in hospital, some do, but that's a good question to, before you sign on, like, hey, what's your cancellation policy and what happens if I'm in hospital? That's a good question, because providers have different cancellation policies, rules. Long answer to a question it's very important is, make sure, just like any other medical service, that you don't get stung with that cancellation fee, because you will still have to pay your contribution, and the government's Miage Care version is still going to get taken out of your budget. So, but if you follow the rules properly, then you won't get charged at all. The flip side of that is because unfortunately staffing's an issue in some areas. If the service, let's say your provider cancels the service, not you should not get charged, and your budget should not get charged. All right, that's a rule across. The provider has to follow that rule. Okay, so the difference is, if you cancel within and you don't give them enough notice, you will probably get charged depending on their policy. But if they cancel, you don't get charged, right? Okay, and if they do that, you need to then go to the advocacy organization and do a complaint, and make sure you get your money back, because that's not the rules. Cool. So look, that's all the questions I'm going to have time for. Keep an eye out. I will email any sort of additional information or do a post, a video, or so on. If there's a lot of big changes, I'll look at whether we can do another, and I'll check the feedback. If you guys, hopefully you guys found that useful. So if that, if a lot of people have, had a good experience in today's webinar, sorry, I've given you a lot of bad news. All I can say is it's accurate, right? And this gives you the opportunity to prepare for July, so that it's not like a big surprise and you get caught out. That's all I can promise you. That's all I promised, and hopefully I've delivered on that. But look, if you found the webinar helpful, let me know. If there's enough changes and there's enough need to do another webinar, I'll launch another one as well. Depending on any updates and changes, and I'll call it like update or something. I'll work out a title. But yeah, if there's any other big changes, I will let you know in the best format I can. And if you're on my email list, I'll send out any more information. Or you can follow me on Facebook or any of the socials or so on. But otherwise, I hope you all have a good day further. Thank you. Bye-bye.